Hi guys, welcome back to another Worship Wednesday video. So I'm going to try to make this one maybe just a little bit shorter. There'll be some longer ones, some shorter ones, just depending on the week. But thank you for joining me today. I'm going to start this video out really quickly by saying let me know in the comments if there are any questions that you want me to cover in a Worship Wednesday video. It can be anything at all, worship related or related to my career or anything like that. There's really no bad questions. So I'll answer any question that you guys ask, as long as it's related, of course, to this topic. But yeah, really excited for today's video. Today's video is going to be just a little bit different. It's not going to be so much about, the actual leading process of, things to do while you're leading or speaking while leading or, planning center or any of that stuff. Today's actually going to be about burnout in ministry and how to avoid that because it's a very common thing. Pastors, tend to get burned out, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Whether you're a worship pastor or a children's pastor or the lead pastor or even a volunteer. I'm not just talking about staff in ministry. I'm talking about really anybody in ministry, and this is how you can avoid burnout in ministry. So, number one, it's so important to invest in yourself spiritually. I always tell my team and anybody really that I talk to, you can't pour out to others if your cup is empty. There's going to be nothing to overflow, right? You have to have a full cup to overflow to others. And your goal in ministry, particularly in worship ministry, is to be able to overflow when you're on the stage and when you're off stage, when you're building up your leaders or when you're just speaking to people in the grocery store, whatever it is, you always want to be able to overflow. And so if you're not filling yourself up, you can't do that. So constantly spend time in the Word. Worship on your own time, not just when you're on stage, but on your own time, not just to music. It's so much more than that. So worship, as you wake up, as you're in the shower, as you're getting ready for the day, live a lifestyle of worship, and that will help to prevent your burnout. So the second one is to remember your family is your first ministry. Whether you are a husband or a wife, or whether you have children, or maybe just your relationship with your siblings or whatever it might be, that is your first ministry. That's your first place for you to do your ministry, and that's your first place for you to be present. So you have to create that work-life balance. In ministry, this is so tricky because there's always something that needs to be done, and a lot of the time it needs to be done right now, and a lot of the time you feel like you're the only one that can do it. So you feel like you have to be there and you have to be doing that, but it's okay to take time off. When you have days off, which if you don't, you absolutely should, enjoy those days off. Make it a plan ahead of time. Hey, I'm going to do this on this day off with my husband or wife or with our kids or whatever it may be. And that's the way it's going to be. And that's the day that I'm doing this. And there's not going to be something that gets in the way, because sometimes you have to set those boundaries of my family is important. And so I believe that God calls me to be with my family. So I'm going to be with them. I'm not just going to work while I'm with them. The third one is don't get to a point, and this kind of goes off of my last point, but don't get to a point where you feel like nothing can be done without you. I feel like especially as worship pastors or anybody who does this type of job, you feel like, well, I have to be there. I have to do this. What are they going to do? Not that you think you're so great, but that's your job, and you have to do it. And to a point, of course, that's true. You have to do your job, but understand that it's not about you, that God is still going to show up without you. And that's something so important to understand. Now, He has called you, and He has a calling on your life, but He can do it without you. And that's something that we have to understand. So if you need a day off, or even, as crazy as it may sound to some of you, a weekend off, figure it out, okay? You guys can figure it out. Delegate to other people. This is why it's so important to build up other leaders. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons that it's so important to build people up that know what they're doing, that you can trust to get the job done, that are called to be in worship ministry or whatever area you're in. It's important to build them up and people that you can trust. So even Jesus had people around Him that helped Him in His ministry. So even Jesus understood that He did not have to do this alone, that He could surround Himself with people that He could trust and have those relationships with those people. So you don't have to do it alone, and you shouldn't do it alone. So the fourth point is find other things that you like to do. I say this one because it was really hard for me because, everybody says it's important to have a hobby, outside of your job. But for me, my job started as a hobby. So it was kind of like this weird balance of, well, this is actually what I like to do. I like to do this, so what else do I do? On my days off, I'll just do this, because this is all I do. And not that that isn't necessarily bad, but it's so important to have other outlets, other things where you can give your mind a break from, okay, I got to plan this, I got to do this, I got to do this. You have to give yourself a mental break, even though what I do is my passion and I love it so much. And I started as a volunteer and now I'm on staff somewhere, and it's something that I have really just worked hard for and prayed hard for and wanted so badly. And I've just loved it, volunteer or staff. I've loved it. I've loved my experience as a worship leader. But at the same time, it's important to have other things. So for me, I like anything artistic. So I like makeup, and a lot of people don't understand that. But on my days off, sometimes I just like to play with makeup and that kind of thing. And YouTube, vlogging on YouTube or whatever it may be. These videos are, of course, work related, I guess you could say. But I love to record videos and things like that. So I like to do that. And so I'm just trying to find those other outlets and other creative outlets that are not necessarily work related that I can do to give my mind a break. So the fifth point is actually a quote that I've often heard said, and I think it's so important, and I love this quote, and it's, if you live off people's compliments, you'll die from their criticism. So you can't really take what people say to heart. And in ministry, there are a lot of amazing people. I have had way more encounters with people, and I know that some people don't have this experience, so if you didn't, I'm really sorry. But I've had way more encounters with people that have been amazing, and I've said, hey, we really enjoy your ministry and all this, over the criticism. But there is criticism involved. There always is. No matter what area of ministry you were in, there is criticism involved, and you have to understand that. But you have to take it with a grain of salt. As cliche as it may sound, you have to just say, you know what, I know who I am, I know who God has called me to be, and I'm going to walk in that, and I'm going to believe that. Same with compliments. You can't let somebody telling you, oh, you're the best worship leader I've ever seen, get to your head, because there are people that can do more than you. And so you have to just find that balance of, hey, thank you, I appreciate that compliment. Hey, thank you for that criticism. I'll take it into consideration. But I still know who I am. I still know there are things I can work on, but I also know that I'm not as bad as what they're saying I am. I know that I'm called. So you're never as good as what some people say that you are. You're never as bad as what some people say that you are. So you have to find that balance right there in the middle of, you know what? I know who I am. I don't live off of compliments from other people because God has called me and He's the one that gives me my identity. But I also don't die from their criticism because God has called me. He gives me my identity, not people. So it's just finding that balance. And I feel like that's a lot of the reason for burnout, is because you feel like, well, everybody hates me, or, well, I'm not doing anything right. And then you start to get burned out because you're working so hard. But understand, God sees you right where you're at. He has called you and He loves you. And that's what's important. So my last point today is be open with the people around you. If you are getting to a place of maybe being burned out in ministry and you aren't working in an environment where you feel like you can express that, you may not be in the healthiest environment. Now, just because you feel like you can't express it doesn't mean that you can't. But if it's been proven to you that you can't express it, that it is not taken well, that if you told your boss, hey, I need a break, and they have said before, no, that's not possible, then you're probably not in a great and healthy environment. But of course, that's for you to pray about and you to decide. But it's so important to be able to be open with people, and to understand, you are more than your job. Something that I've had to tell myself and God has had to reveal to me over my years in ministry, which of course there are people that have been in this way longer than me. But for my age, I've been in it for quite a while and I have experienced days of burnout. But understand, you're more than your job and you're more than just God's employee. One time God spoke that to my heart, as I was like, well, I have to do this and I have to do this. And I wasn't really thinking about myself at all. And He just said, you know what? I love you. You don't work for me. You do. I mean, I called you to this job to do, but you're not just my employee. You're my child, and I want you. I don't, if you stepped away from this for a while, I still want you. If you stepped away from it forever, I still want you. Of course, I've called you to this. And of course, I want you to, do everything I've called you to do, but I love you either way. He is the ultimate perfect father. There is no other father like him. But I think for people like me that are kind of like, I like to make people happy, and I like to do things to please people, and I like for people to think that I'm doing a good job, and that's just the kind of person that I am, if I'm being totally real. So for me, I'm like, okay, I gotta please God today. I gotta do this. I gotta do this. But at the end of the day, he says, you know what, Rose, I love you. Either way. Either way, whether you failed today, I still love you because I'm your father. I'm your dad. And that's kind of where I'm getting closer to God, in that sense of he understands right where I am, and I'm not just his employee. He hasn't just given me this job to do and then he doesn't care about me after it. He loves me and he loves you. And it's so important to understand that, to walk in your identity and as a child of God, and not just a worship leader, not just a musician, not just a lead pastor, not just a businessman or a beautician or a carpenter or whatever you might be. It's so easy to get lost in those titles, but ultimately your title is a child of God beyond anything else. If you gave up everything else, you were still his child and he still loves you. So of course there are going to be days of being burned out. There's going to be stuff way more intense that is harder to recover from. There is times in ministry that I've experienced where you are not treated right, and where people are really not the best to you, and you wonder, why am I in this position? I promise you, first of all, it gets better. But secondly, there's nothing wrong with taking a break. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have prayed about it and you feel like it's time for you to have a short break, or whatever God's calling you to do, it's okay. And just trust him and trust in his plan for your life. And so I love ministry. I love what I get to do. I look at it as a privilege. It's such an honor to be able to do this, such a privilege. That's what I tell my team before we ever go out. It's a privilege to do this. Whether we get out here and we just do terrible, it is still a privilege. Whether we get out here and everybody has bad things to say about us, we are still privileged and honored to be able to do this. So remember that today, that you have breath in your lungs to praise him. And that's so important, and that's so awesome and exciting. So thank you for joining me today. Let me know in the comments again if you have any questions or anything specific I can be praying for you specifically and your team specifically. I'd love to do that. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a blessed day.